Okay, there are going to be two parts of this in terms of presentation. In between, you're going to have some more independent work to complete our study of Islamist terrorism. Today, though, what you need to do is just follow along with this presentation. Our objectives for Islamist terrorism are going to look very much like our previous objectives in a lot of ways. One, I want you to understand the basics and background of Islamist terrorism, because the fact is you guys are young enough that by the time you were kind of aware of what was going on in the world, Islamist terrorism was not so much in the headlines. We need to understand the main groups in the conflict. In this case, we're going to be focusing on different terrorist groups and understand what motivates people to participate in those groups. We're going to talk about that in terms of different levels, leaders, and kind of your more run-of-the-mill, rank-and-file terrorists or jihadis. A big part of this is going to be weighing up those different motivations. Because if we want to try to reduce Islamist terrorism, the ways to do that is figure out what motivates people, and if it isn't purely just religious hatred, then there might be ways of directing those people to do something else besides blowing things up and killing people. And finally, we saw this in our last discussion assignment that you guys got earlier this week about comparing the troubles in Northern Ireland to the Arab-Israeli conflict. I want you to be able to make and defend arguments about whether religious conflicts, in this case Islamist terrorism, are really about religion or if they're more about other things. Okay, so first up, what is terrorism? All right. It's got an official definition, and there are several. The threatened or actual use of illegal force and violence by a non-state actor to attain a political, economic, religious, or social goal through fear, coercion, or intimidation. That's a lot. So one thing that's important is this is action by a non-state actor. Okay, that's the key. Non-state actors, they can be individuals, they can be groups. They're actors, so they take an action, right? And they do not have the authority or permission of a state. Right? We say states, right? You guys can also think of country. We're talking here about a government. So it's a person or a group who act without having the authority or permission of a government. If you're a soldier and you commit violence, you are not a terrorist or not a terrorist because you are acting with the authority of the state. The non-state actor is essential to that. Okay? Otherwise, you would have people accusing soldiers doing their job, following orders, being considered terrorists. And non-state actors can be lots of different things. Okay? They can be businesses. Apple is a non-state actor. Microsoft, that runs the software on our computers, non-state actor. Major League Baseball, with teams in the United States and Canada, is an international non-state actor, like Apple. It can also be charities. So, a group called Doctors Without Borders sends doctors into dangerous places to provide medical care where nobody else will go, and there aren't local doctors to do that work. These people will go into war zones. I don't know if they're operating in Gaza right now, but that's the kind of place they go. It's very rare that there's a place too dangerous for them.
What, 9/11?
Yes.
You know there's new videos released of it? From people down below.
Like conspiracy theory videos or just videos? Okay, because be careful with what's on YouTube. There's all of these conspiracy theorists that argue that it was, quote, an inside job.
So what really happened?
What really happened? What news has told you? What is like written about in Wikipedia articles? Terrorists hijacked planes. The terrorists had taken flight lessons, so they knew how to pilot these planes, and they crashed them into both towers of the World Trade Center. They crashed one into the Pentagon, and then they were trying to crash another one, but by that time, passengers had figured out what was going on, and they rushed the cockpit and forced the plane to crash in a field in Pennsylvania. That's what happened. It's not an inside job. There weren't missiles.
Oh, so it wasn't supposed to go?
No, they were. I mean, that was on purpose. That was the terrorists doing that.
Well, why do they want to kill themselves?
For martyrdom, which we'll get to in a little bit. You're asking good questions, Joels. Other non-state actors could be clubs that you would belong to, right, as a high school student. Now, in these examples, I focused on things that have an international dimension because terrorism also clearly has an international dimension. Those pilots, I can't remember if all of them, but I believe most of them, if I remember right, were Saudis. And of course, terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, which was the terrorist group that was responsible for the 9/11 attacks, are also non-state actors. So they have to be non-state actors, and they have to use force to attain their goals. That's terrorism. And it does not have to be religious. Before Islamist terrorism was the kind of terrorism everybody thought about, they thought about communists who were robbing banks and blowing things up and kidnapping people and killing people in the 1970s and 1980s. All right, now if we're going to be talking about Islamist terrorism, we have to know what Islamist or Islamism means. And again, got an official definition that gets pretty long. We'll break it down. So Islamism is a belief that Islamic law, which is referred to usually as Sharia law, or Muslim values should play a central role in public life. Okay, and by public life, I mean in government, in schools, right, in businesses. They feel that Islam has things to say about government, politics should be conducted, how the law should apply, how specifically here again, Sharia law or Muslim law should be applied, and how other people, not just Muslims, should conduct themselves in accordance with Islamic morals. As I said, I'm going to break that down. So societies, right, groups of people who share a culture and a territory, governments and laws should be based on the Muslim religion and Islamic teachings. So some examples of what that looks like. Until very recently, women were not allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia because it was seen as being against Muslim teachings. Movie theaters were banned. No movies. No Hollywood 10 like we've got up at the North Shops. None of that. Alcohol is illegal. They're kind of moving away from that. Now you can go to a bar and order drinks that in America would be an alcoholic cocktail, but in Saudi Arabia are just like something that is kind of the same but without alcohol. Which just sounds kind of weird, but that's what they do. Might also mean that women have to go outside. If they leave the home, they have to cover their face. They might have to cover pretty much everything except an area around their eyes. They might not be, this is not necessarily in Saudi Arabia, but in Afghanistan under the Taliban. If you were a woman and you went out in public without a male escort who was either your husband or a family member, you could be killed. That was a crime punishable by death. You weren't allowed to go to school. Of course, now that the Taliban is back in control of Afghanistan, that's going on again. And even when they were allowed, some of like the terrorists, one of the things they would do is throw acid in the faces of girls trying to go to school. So it's examples. Now, one of them that I haven't mentioned at this point is Iran, which that's the flag of Iran. And of course, the one I have talked about, which is that one, is Saudi Arabia. And remember, in these places, it's not only Muslims who have to follow those rules. It is also non-Muslims, people coming in from other countries, but you still have to follow those rules. That's that final part of that definition, how other people, not just themselves, not just Muslims, should conduct themselves. Yes, you know what to do, Joels. Okay, now let's put Islamism with terrorism. So Islamist terrorism is what we've already talked about, terrorism. It's violence to achieve a goal through intimidation or coercion by non-state actors. So this terrorism has the goal of imposing Islamist government, or at least Sharia law, on societies. One of those examples we've already talked about is Al-Qaeda. They were the big deal in the 1990s. They blew up U.S. embassies in places like Tanzania. They tried to blow up the World Trade Center with bombs in the parking garage underneath of it. That didn't work. And so then they flew planes into it, and that did work. Al-Qaeda's goal was to make a caliphate. So has been the goal of ISIS, or Islamic State. Now, interestingly, with Islamic terrorist groups, in some ways they are a lot like international businesses. Okay? Apple and Samsung compete to get people to buy their phones. Right? They want Jackson to buy an Apple. They want Jocelyn to buy a Samsung. Right? Al-Qaeda and Islamic State also compete. They try to get people to join their terrorist group and not the other one. And Islamic State in recent years has been more successful than Al-Qaeda in recruiting new terrorists and supporters. But their goal is